This is Fred Richani. In this interview, we chat with Greg MacGillivray, legendary documentary filmmaker, IMAX pioneer, and the man behind the incredible 5 Summer Stories documentary celebrating its 50th anniversary. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. We just checked out highlights of the trailer, the 50th anniversary of the legendary documentary, 5 Summer Stories. I feel like this was kind of an ode to the culture of surfing and the 70s at the time. A really cool trip down memory lane, a really cool history lesson for myself as somebody who wasn't born in the 70s. How surreal is it 50 years later to not only see this film still fondly remembered, but getting re-released widely?
It's wild for me. The 50 years went by very quickly, but back in 1972, it was an interesting time. The world was changing, and not only was surfing changing, but the world on shore was changing. If you remember, and I know you're too young to remember, the first Earth Day occurred right there in the early 70s. And it's kind of amazing. I read this the other day. 10% of the United States population attended one of those Earth Day events way back. And I mean, that's huge. That's, 25 million people going to an Earth Day event in their community. The concern for the environment was just beginning. The word ecology was just kind of used and tossed around. And when we made this film, we tried to reflect that and the values that would impact surfers. For example, keeping the water fresh and clean and away from things that could cause you harm, like diseases, and the bills that were passed by Congress in the early 70s and were signed by Nixon because he was afraid of surfers and hippies. Those bills, about 28 bills, including the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the establishment of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. All those things are still kind of the cornerstones of, the search for a cleaner environment for everyone in America, whether it be the skies, the air that we breathe, the mountains, the freshness of the snow that comes off those mountains, the streams, the lakes, wherever you want to swim, the water offshore. They're all cleaner now because of those acts. So it was an interesting time. If you go back that 50 years, and then surfing, of course, was undergoing a renaissance. Shorter boards, surf leashes were just invented. There are very few, if any, surf leashes in the film, but now they're commonplace. Every surfer has a surf leash, and that changed surfing altogether. And so the fragmentation of surfing at that time, the over commercialization of surfing at that time, surfers not being treated fairly at that time, and the closing off of beaches to surfers pre the Surfrider Foundation and pre the California Coastal Commission. These were big issues. And so we touched on all of those in 5 Summer Stories.
You most certainly did. And it's kind of crazy that these days, of course, working with the Surfrider Foundation and Quicksilver, and I'm sure just being in the game for so long, seeing how the surfing industry, the whole genre has changed for you. What's kind of been the most surprising for you? Is it the financial figures? Is it the level of stars that these people have now with the power of social media? What's something that really kind of jumps out at you as somebody who's always followed this?
Well, I love it that surfers are finally making a good living from surfing. They deserve it. They've all worked hard to get where they are, even though, surfing is the most fun thing you'll ever do in your life. And so if you're making money from it, you're absolutely killing it on both sides. But it's not unlike any other sport. Once you can turn that hobby, that love that you have, into something that can actually be a career for you, that is magic. That is, all of a sudden, you become someone different. I have to work, at a store somewhere, and and spend all your daytime, doing something that you don't want to do necessarily, you can be out training yourself to look better at the contests and look better for all your sponsors. And so it's a wonderful thing. I love the fact. And now they're in the Olympics. The Olympics last a couple years ago in Japan, had the first surfing events ever. And that's been a fight that we've all been supporting over the last 20 years. And finally, it got, because Japan has a lot of surfers and a long coastline and some really good surfing spots. They've let in the surfing events, and I think they'll continue on.
Now, you're no stranger to film. Of course, you have a legendary career spanning over 60 years. You've done a little bit of everything. Of course, you're best known for your documentaries, and you're somebody I feel like that's kind of looked at, I don't know, as a visionary or somebody that was a very forward thinking, and you kind of paid attention to the technology. You were kind of one of the people at the forefront of IMAX technology. And not only that, but if you watch 5 Summer Stories, you could see kind of like the slow motion, the montage style, which I think has aged extremely well, over the last 50 years and everything. When you were working with that IMAX technology and the slow motion and all those kind of film effects, did you know you were doing something that was kind of pushing the envelope, or was this at the time something you thought, hey, this looks kind of cool for my film?
No, we knew. But, that was part of the joy of working with Jim Freeman is we both were technically adept and interested in all kinds of new ways to get camera angles and shots. I would build waterproof housings for cameras, and I'd buy different kinds of cameras and try them out in the water and trying to get underwater shots and then coming up and revealing the surfer, all kinds of inventive things that hadn't been seen before. And Jim was really great because he kind of pioneered the use of helicopters in photography. And that was one of the coolest things. And so when we decided with 5 Summer Stories to try something new with super high speed, slow motion, real slow motion, 10 times slower than normal speed. So you could see the water crystals just float through the air as they come off the top of a wave. This is something that no one had ever seen before. And of course, nowadays you can see it in any TV commercial, but a GoPro could actually deliver you a similar image, little teeny camera that big. But this was something that was new. We had to go out and buy these 2 very expensive cameras and train ourselves how to use them, and then go out and spend months shooting with them because it takes a lot of time to get the right camera angle and to get those images. And so I look at the film today and I go, oh, those images are still beyond compare. No one has ever done those kinds of things quite as well as Jim Freeman and Bud Brown and I did them way back then, partly because we spent so much time. We spent 2.5 years making that film. And so we poured our hearts and soul, and we knew it was going to be our final surfing film. We were moving to Hollywood productions. In fact, the reason it's 5 Summer Stories, and so it's 5 little bits, is so we can work on the story, one story, and then go to Hollywood and make some films, and then come back and work on another story, back and forth. And that worked out great for the film, and it worked out great for our careers. And it allowed us to do these new things with cameras. And so now, fast forward 4 years, we were premiering our first IMAX film called To Fly, and it still plays at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. And then subsequent to that, I specialized in IMAX filmmaking and trying to create new styles of documentary storytelling through IMAX, through this powerful medium, gigantic screens, ultimate clarity of image, great sound, 6-channel and now 12-channel stereo sound, and trying to basically deliver to the audience something that they could not get anywhere else. And that's been my career. I love technically achieving new things showing the audience new things in a new way, and telling a story in a unique fashion. So that's my life. It's pretty simple.
So is your career kind of like riding the waves, going with the flow, like, hey, rather than being kind of apprehensive to the new technology, embracing it and seeing how you can push the envelope further?
No, I always wanted to try and take risks. I always loved, those two cameras that we bought to do 5 summer stories. That was a huge expense. Those were like $10,000. That was a lot. That was like 100,000 today. That was a lot of money to us. But we decided, okay, in order to push this envelope further, let's take this risk. And it was a risky thing, basically changing my career mode from Hollywood to IMAX. In 1980, when I decided, okay, let's see if we can make this IMAX medium work. At that time, the theaters were growing in number, but still there were only about 20 or less theaters. And other visionary methods of film, like Cinerama, had tried the same thing and failed. In fact, Cinerama got to be about 25 theaters total. And then they went out of business. And everyone was worried that IMAX was going to follow suit, do the same thing. And I had confidence. I would look at the faces of people as they exited IMAX theaters, like at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, or at the Sony complex later on when it was built, or Liberty Science Center near you. When they come out of the theater and you say, how'd you like it? They just go, oh my gosh, it took me away. It took me to some place I'll never visit. And that's something that they'll love forever. And they'll come back and want to experience that same kind of thing, maybe in a different place, different storytelling again. And so you can tell from the audience whether you've got a hit or a miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's only enhanced the experience for people in theaters. We talked off the air about Liberty Science Center, which is near me, all the different museums in New York and across the country. It just serves as a great history lesson and a unique experience and everything. And it's kind of cool that now we see a different form of IMAX now spilling into, regular theaters nationwide. So yeah, you were certainly ahead of the curve there. And you mentioned that in 1980, your career was kind of at a crossroads and you figured, okay, I think we want to kind of go all in with this IMAX thing and working with museums and everything. Around that time, there was a little film called The Shining by Stanley Kubrick, legendary film. And what a lot of people may not know about your decorated career is that you actually worked on that film behind the scenes. So can you talk a little bit about that unique experience and why you decided, even after that, working with Stanley Kubrick, to further go into IMAX as opposed to staying in Hollywood?
I tell you, it was a hard decision, but working with Kubrick was a dream come true. He's always been my favorite director. And he was Jim Freeman's as well. And Jim had died 2 years before I got that opportunity to work with Stanley. And Jim died in a helicopter crash, and we were working on a TV commercial for Kodak. But Jim would have loved working with Kubrick. But for me, when Kubrick called and said, my assistant director has told me all about you, and I need you to work with me on The Shining. And of course, I dropped the phone and I said, wow, yes, I want to. Tell me what I can do. And so he explained what he wanted me to do, which is shoot all of the American scenery shots and doubled shots. So we didn't have Jack Nicholson in the car that we were filming, but we had a double. Sometimes it was my wife, sometimes it was my Jeff Blythe's wife, or sometimes other people. But the deal was, we had the VW that matched exactly the VW that they had in London. They were shooting everything in London, and that shoot took 13 months. And so I would shoot things in America and then go over there and show them to the whole crew, including Jack and Shelley and the whole John Alcott, the cinematographer. And all these people became friends of mine because I was kind of like a breath of fresh air. They were locked on the sound stage at Elstree Studios in London, 6 days a week. He takes, tons of shots, like 30 takes, 40 takes, 50 takes to a single scene just to get it perfect. And he finds different things as he's delivering it and different ways to light it. And so the shots are different from one another. Anyway, what was cool for me is I learned how to make movies better. And I learned from him how to use your budget better and how to stretch your budget in a way that no one else in Hollywood was doing. In fact, he was probably the most efficient director and producer in the history of Hollywood. He took, with The Shining, about $14 million and made it look like the budget was $30 million. And it was astounding, the kinds of things that he did. But he'd make deals with people. He said to Jack, hey, I'm not going to pay you a lot per day, but I'm going to hire you for a lot of days. And Jack said, great, I'll do it. As long as I get one day off a week. Anyway, it was a joy to learn from Kubrick. And probably one of my regrets is, as you pointed out correctly, I did make the decision to then, double down on the IMAX industry and try to improve the documentary filmmaking in IMAX over the next decades. But Kubrick then called me for his next film, Full Metal Jacket. He said, Greg, I need you. Please work with me on this film. And I said, I got to get back to you because I got 100 things going on right now. And they're IMAX films, and I'm trying to make this system work and trying to improve the cameras and get new things done and show the audience how cool these images can be on this gigantic screen. And he goes, but this film is going to be great as anti-war film, and you're anti-war and all this. And so, but I said, eventually I had to say, I just can't fit it in. And he didn't really know at that time when we talked exactly what he wanted me to do. It was sort of vague, shoot me images that look like South Vietnam, but it was an interesting thing. And I very much regret not doing that, because working with him taught me probably more than you can get out of film school in 3 years. And so it was a sensational experience for a young filmmaker.
Definitely. And I'm sure a lot of people can learn from this interview. That's so much experience, so much great work put out there over time. For any aspiring filmmakers, maybe some filmmakers in the game right now, what's the best piece of advice you give them for success?
Well, it's all about story. Every film has to have a solid story. And those stories almost always have to involve the human condition and humans that you fall in love with and care for. And so what you should do if you're studying to be a filmmaker is learn English literature, learn art and English literature, because that's really what filmmaking is. It's that marriage of those two mediums that are both deep and bold and wonderful and filled with nuance. And you can find new ways to do everything, which is the fun thing of filmmaking, is trying to find a new way to tell a story with new visuals, with new sound, with new music, but to do it in an inventive and creative way that really brings across the humanity and the soul of it all. The key is storytelling. And now that's not to say that there aren't wonderful visual treatises like Koyaanisqatsi, for example, that we worked on with Godfrey Reggio and Ron Fricke. Those are wonderful to watch, but they're deep, but you create that own deepness for yourself. Storytelling, narrative storytelling, is really the name of what movies are. And if you've got a great story, it'll become a success. You can almost goof off if you have a great story, and you'll be successful. Though if you do a really good job and you work your butt off, then the story's going to be even better. It's like Kubrick, his idea, and I had the same idea, is that you control everything that you possibly can control. And because you can't control everything as you're making a movie, you try to control everything you can control. So the sets, the camera movement, the acting, but you can't control the way what the audience is bringing to them, to the theater. And so sometimes you have a lucky experience and the audience is just ready for that kind of a film. The Shining, for example, became Kubrick's most successful film. And it just was at the right time in his career. He'd already done, things like Barry Lyndon, which weren't very successful, cost a lot of money, gorgeous movie, but it just didn't have enough of a compelling story. I mean, I adore the film, but it just didn't do well with the public. So he needed something, he felt, that was going to get him back into the public's eye. And Clockwork Orange and The Shining really did that in a massive way. And The Shining, it was not only Stephen King's third best-selling book, out of how many books has he written? 1.5 million, something like that. He's the most voracious writer there is in the history of mankind, and one of the best. But you end up with Kubrick and you go, okay, I learned something from every film that he made. And every film was different from the previous. He never repeated himself one bit. So I learned a tremendous number of things from working with him. But that's the answer to the question. Storytelling is the key to filmmaking. Learn storytelling through learning literature.
Absolutely fantastic insight. I greatly appreciate that. And why should people watch Five Summer Stories?
I think it'll just take them back and they'll reflect on the past 50 years of culture and society, America, and, the value of surfing to the relationship that we have, we must understand between nature and man. Surfers are connected, in a solid way with nature through the ocean. You're in nature. You depend on it. You depend on those waves coming. And so that respect that surfers have for nature is really intense. It's kind of the same respect maybe that a mountain climber has for the mountain that he climbs. And the deal is, I think you'll find, like I said, with the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the past 50 years have been good things for America's waters. With groups like Surfrider, but also groups like Oceana, which I support heavily, you end up seeing that we can make a difference with the health of the planet. And we possibly can make enough changes to our activities to make the oceans and the air and the land healthy once again, and a good place for humans to live.
The 50th anniversary. Actually, bonus question, from what I understand as well, later this year, you actually have a memoir, right? A visual memoir?
Oh, yeah. Well, all my friends, because I've done all these films, I think 60 or 70 films. And so they forced me into writing a book of all the strange adventures. And so I wrote a book, dictated it as I was walking the beach over a year's time, and edited it over a 2-year period. And it's got great visuals, great photographs, and it's called 500 Summer Stories. And I'm not really sure if there's really 500 stories in it, but certainly there are some really good and funny ones, including, wonderful story like I was telling about Kubrick, and and making the film Everest and making the film The Living Sea and To the Limit and other films that have become sort of classics of the IMAX industry.
Well, we really do appreciate your time, sir. Before we let you go, where can fans find you online and where can we find you next?
At Mac Free Films, it's MacGillivray Freeman Films is the name of the company, but macfreefilms.com. Or you can go to fivesummerstories.com. You know, we also have a foundation called, it's my hat, One World, One Ocean Foundation. So it's all about ocean conservation. But also, you know, I hope people support the Surfrider Foundation, Quicksilver Company, and you know, the World Wildlife Fund and Oceana. These are wonderful groups that are making a big difference in our planet.